Picture this. It's November of 2025, and you only have about $500 to $600 to your name. You want to build a new PC, nothing too fancy. You have a 1080p 144Hz monitor you want to take advantage of, but then you start hearing something about Ramageddon and how AI was the reason corporations needed to jack up their prices, yet again screwing over the common consumer with their electronic needs. You also don't believe in Black Friday deals, because it's usually where sellers change the prices to be some ridiculous number, only to drop it down to what it was originally and list it as a fire sale. Oh. Well, I guess we don't really need to imagine this then, as what I described is either happening literally right now, or about to happen within the month. Luckily for you, dear viewer, I put together a computer for about $500 that will, for the most part, keep up with modern-day 1080p resolution demands. However, it is most definitely not the perfect system, and as we go through this video, I will tell you why, and how you can improve on it so you can get more for your money. Let's start with the case, and it's nothing too flashy. This is the Vitru M05 Micro ATX case. It's got your standard affair of things included, such as a single ARGB fan in the back, a goodie bag with your hardware in it, alongside not only USB 2 and 3, but also USB-C, which is a nice addition with this budget case. Unfortunately, we won't be using it in this build as the motherboard doesn't support it, and we will be using all of our USB headers, both 2 and 3 in this build, but in the case you build in this case, no pun intended, with a board that has a USB-C header, you won't be left in the dust. I also will be replacing the fan with a familiar set of 4, which, if you remember from the last PC build regarding the F45, yes, I will be reusing and putting the RGB fans from there into here, RGB hub and all. If you feel the need to fill out this case with actual white RGB fans yourself though, a pack of 3 to 5 Thermalright fans on Amazon will be about 15 to 20 bucks. I found the M05 locally for $40, and the case itself falls into the same category as the GameMax F45 featured inside my $800 AM5 build, which is the category of $50 to $60 PC case that will do its job, easy enough to build in and not cut your fingers. Personally though, I tried to either find some name brand cases locally like Fractal, NZXT, or Corsair, or if you want to buy something new, I would personally suggest something like the Fantex XT Pro, the Okino Cypress 5 Air, or even the Montech X5M, which has been featured a lot on Zach's Tech Tips. With that all said and done though, let's start with the heart of the system. We are going with the tried and true AM4 platform, and at this point in time, I can't even decide whether to say this platform is dead or not, because I wouldn't be surprised if AMD releases the 5300 X3D or something in 2026. But anyway, the CPU that I chose is the Ryzen 5 5500, a 6-core 12-thread processor that is the cheapest on offer, that is also readily available with the Ryzen 5000 series, and it's similar to the performance of a Ryzen 5 3600. We will be putting this 5500 into an AliExpress special that I had lying around, but I did buy it for around $50-ish, I think, and this is the KLLI SRE B450M. Look, I'm Chinese and even I don't know how to say that. Closer. Anyway, this is the one specifically with 4 RAM slots and not 2. Outside of having no ARGB headers, this motherboard actually has everything someone could want, from a Wi-Fi card slot to a PCIe slot above the motherboard for a Wi-Fi card or something, M.2 NVMe support, and even multiple fan headers. What's nice about AMD motherboards in general is that even if you get a rather unknown brand motherboard like this one for example, for the most part AMD will still properly download the chipset drivers onto the system with its auto detection software, so you won't even have to worry about getting some sketchy Google Drive link for basic motherboard necessities. However, starting with the obvious, if you can, purchase a board from a name brand instead. eBay is flooded with properly manufactured refurbished B450s and B550s, and they come from ASRock, Asus, you name it. I personally would recommend a board with a B550 chipset though, since they're not only on the latest updates, but they also support PCIe Gen 4. I would also replace the Ryzen 5 5500 with a Ryzen 5 3600/3600X, or maybe if you're lucky, a 3700X for not much more, as the 3600 specifically is pretty much the same in performance for usually less money, but with more L3 cache, which is important for gaming, and also allows for PCIe Gen 4 support on both your storage and your GPU. For the cooler, I'm using this Wraith Prism stock cooler that I picked up from Jay's 2 Cents so-called Tech Fair garage sale for $2. However, I understand that this is not really reasonable for the average person, so either use the stock AMD Wraith cooler that comes with the box if you were to buy this new or if you have one lying around, or get a $15 to $20-ish tower cooler from Thermalright or ID Cooling. They can be found anywhere really, and will perform better than the Prism. For the RAM, until companies start releasing 24 gig kits, I personally believe 32 gigabytes is the standard memory requirement amount nowadays with the average person using the ever-bloated Windows 11. And I picked up this lucky find for $50, a 2x16 kit of Corsair Vengeance RGB Pro. However, the keen-eyed of you may realize that even though this is CL16, the speeds on this kit are only 2666 megatransfers per second, which, as many of you may know, is kind of a big deal with Ryzen CPUs. Now, it doesn't cut your FPS in half or anything when gaming, but optimally, anything 3200 or even 3600 is more ideal. However, considering that even this RAM kit is $170 USD on Amazon, I think we can take what we can get. For the storage, since this is a PCIe Gen 3 limited system due to the 5500 and the B450 chipset, I went with a WD SN750. It is one of the better drives in its class, and it does its job fine, though I did get this used, and unless you can test drive health and view the amount of data written onto the drive historically like I did, I personally would instead go with something like a new NATAC NV5000 or NV7000 off eBay, or any other Gen 4 drive you can reasonably get your hands on for a good price, as it's better to have a bit of overhead with storage speeds, and because if you upgrade in the future to something like AM5 or even LGA 1700, you'll be able to take advantage of the support for faster storage speeds without needing to rebuy anything. Now, try not to flinch like an abused dog because you heard 6.7 on the internet, but the GPU I picked up for this build is the RTX 3050 8GB. The literal only reason why I decided to use this for this build is because the original GPU I wanted to use for this system, which was a sexy ass EVGA 2070 Super FTW3, literally could not fit into the PCIe slot because the USB 3.0 connector prevented me from doing so, as you can see here. I picked up the 3050 8GB for $120 locally, which honestly is not even a bad price for this card at all, but obviously there are far more vastly superior options compared to this one, either for just a little more money or even the same amount. Such examples would include the 2060 Super, the 2070 Super like I mentioned before, the 3060 12GB, or if you go AMD, a used 6600, or if you're lucky, perhaps a 7600 is not only perfectly fine, but would definitely outpace the 3050 8GB. However, we're working with what we got, and all things considered, I guess it wasn't a 6GB version. We're not trying to upgrade the office PC here after all. And last, for the power supply, I actually picked up this Thermaltake BM3 semi-modular 80 Plus bronze PSU with the 2070 Super I mentioned before in a combo for $160. So I'll value this around $35 perhaps? It's got 2 slots for PCIe cables, and even a 12-volt high-power Arsen cable in the case if you pick up like a Founders Edition 3060 Ti or 3070 or something. Alright, let's do some benchmarks real quick. Starting off with Battlefield 6 RedSec, you can see that we're on a mixture of low to medium settings, alongside DLSS performance enabled. I also turned on nvidia app's automatic tuning tool, which I heard, albeit doesn't do much, won't really harm you either, so I figured I'd just turn it on anyway. And I gotta say, even though that the hardware is under the recommended specs, especially the GPU, since the 3050 is weaker than the 2060, we're still holding an 80 FPS average overlooking scenery, blowing things up, shooting things, and sending my teammate to his death. Considering the game still looks really good, I'd say we're off to a good start here, considering I had expected about 50 FPS average going into this, but good job, DICE. Moving on to Fortnite, we're going to play on performance mode first, as I'd imagine a person using the system would do so we'll do DX12 later. Based Simpsons collab, by the way. We're leaving 3D res at 100% and moving view distance to epic while keeping things at low and turning on nvidia's reflex boost thing. In the midst of a small skirmish, it seems pretty consistent around the 150-ish FPS mark, which is plenty, at least in my opinion. What's more important is also the frame time consistency, which is also really stable, and that's a good thing considering a single little micro stutter can be the difference between confirming your kill and getting sent back to the lobby. I also captured some DLSS balance performance alongside high settings, which honestly is pretty unpopular and you probably shouldn't do this, but I only did it because I wanted to realistically stress the system in 1080p while also making use of the RTX tax that I paid, because DLSS is an nvidia thing. And despite all that, we're getting around 120 FPS average, which isn't bad either, though obviously if you want more FPS you would use something like DLSS performance and epic view distance with everything else on low instead. So if you're wondering why these benchmarks are the way that they are, and you're wondering why the FPS is low, quote unquote, it's because the settings I chose make the game look better, which you honestly probably shouldn't do, so be sure to not make my mistake, unless if you actually want to make Fortnite look really good. Finally, for the last game of the suite, we're taking a look at Marvel Rivals. Now, I'm playing on literally what I loaded the game up with, and it gave me DLSS quality on medium settings, and the performance isn't bad, although I'm unsure if this will be consistent across maps. You can see though, we're getting around 70 to 80 FPS here with a pretty consistent frame time graph. Now, I will admit I screwed up here though. When I swapped to low settings, I forgot to change the DLSS setting as well, so even though we're on low settings, we're still on DLSS quality when it should be on performance instead, so expect at least maybe 30 to 40 more FPS than what you're seeing here, but even then, it's still holding its own quite well with a good frame time graph and an FPS average. And there you have it, a system for around $500 that can play today's games in 1080p at a decently high refresh rate. Albeit not perfect, I'm sure it's much better value than buying every single component new, unless if peace of mind is something you value enough for value trade-off. Am I saying you should copy this build? Absolutely not. There is a lot of performance left on the table. The RTX 3050 8GB doesn't have access to PCIe Gen 4 speeds due to the CPU and motherboard. The CPU itself is a little castrated with its L3 cache halved due to it being a 5600G without its integrated graphics. The RAM isn't the ideal speed, and generally speaking, the GPU can be improved upon a lot with either an equal amount or just a tad more money, depending on where you are in the world. However, if you happen to have this exact CPU and GPU combo, I don't think you're necessarily in a bad spot at all, especially when you're just trying to game at 1080p, high refresh rate or not. As you saw, the benchmark showed that it still can hang in there with a consistent 60+ FPS performance in some of today's most played titles, while also putting up decent frames and frame time consistency, which honestly surprised even me, and I handle a lot of budget hardware. I suppose I'm a little spoiled for choice though, considering that my main rig is running an i7-13700 and a RTX 4070 Ti Super, but that's besides the point. Either way, I hope this video was of help to you, if not at least served as some form of entertainment value, and if you have any thoughts or comments on the parts, or perhaps the video itself on how good I did or how I can do better, I'd like to hear them. My channel isn't really big after all, and I tend to read every comment that comes my way, and I respond more times than not. Until next time though, may you, dear viewer, have a great day or night, and of course, best of luck deal hunting.